First off, I'd like to give a shout out to Suge Knight and say happy birthday. Know you're inside. Highly unlikely that you'll even listen to this, but those that are out there that do listen to this, you know, it's a shout out. And this shout out is for you to hold your head up because, uh, it's got to be tough being inside with all that you've been through. But I did listen to your podcast today where you came on the other gentleman's show, and loved listening to that. Loved hearing the stories about death row, and like to start out with a little bit of a story from my own past because there's a lot of similarities between what was going on at Death Row Records and what just goes on in typical film production. It's movie sets, it's controversy, and it's going on every day in Hollywood. It's going on every day in the music industry. And I was working on a Citroen commercial. It was really more of a still photo shoot, but it was for Citroen, the car company. And it was at the time when we were leading up to the Iraq invasion. And so we were working with the French, we were working with the English, and the crew was American. And I was with the producer, and I wanted to have a meeting with the producer, and she started off by just going at it, telling me about this and that and the other and this thing and that thing and the other thing. And I sat and listened, and I was kind of like in my own mind questioning, what the hell does this have to do with me? And there was a lot of controversy that was going on that set. And it was because we were about to invade Iraq. And if you guys remember back in that day, and some of you aren't even old enough to remember, we were being served freedom fries. They were no longer being called French fries because the French were not with us going into Iraq. And so here I was with the French and the English and the Americans, and the controversy was boiling up at the time. And here I was talking to the producer, and she was going on and on about the controversies that were going on and who was saying what about who and the whole thing. And I just sat there in bewilderment because all I wanted to do was get a check. And I looked at her and I said, hey, I appreciate, all that you've had to say about this, but, I just want to get a check. And she was like, oh, you just want to get paid. And I was like, yeah, I just want to get paid. And I think we have to look at Suge Knight the same way with this stuff. Somebody had to be running the music side of that business. And I'm not saying that there weren't other sides to the business, but the music side of it needed to be run. Suge said it in his interview today. He ran it like a football team. All of my research indicates the same thing. And I don't think if somebody is getting embroiled in all the controversies that are going on in a record label like that with Crips and Bloods and musicians and artists and egos and jealousy and attitudes and drug use and all the crazy shit that goes on at a record label, that if somebody wasn't focusing on the music and actually getting these artists to the finish line, that we would have any of the great music that we have today as a result of Death Row Records. And it's the one thing that I think Suge Knight doesn't get credit for, that he really deserves credit for. And sometimes he gets credit for it, but mostly it's about the controversies. It's about, you know, Vanilla Ice dangling off a balcony by his ankles by Suge, and, you know, things that are just physically impossible. You know, there's so many things that are in the folklore, and I'm not saying that some of those things didn't actually happen, but I'm saying also that Suge Knight was focused on making records. He was focused on getting the music to the shelves. He was focused on getting the artists into the studios and keeping them focused on the business, showing up, laying down their tracks, and getting the albums finished and onto the store shelves, getting them distributed, getting them played, getting them pressed, all that crazy stuff, the publicity, the marketing, that all needed to be done, and Suge Knight was focused on that stuff. From my research. Now, I wasn't there, but we have a lot of data points, metadata about that, and a lot of people who talk about how Suge keep people focused on the business side. And yes, he was there to renegotiate contracts. He was there to negotiate contracts. He was there for all that stuff. But he was also there to get the music done. Now, at the time that Suge was in jail awaiting his trial, Russell Poole and I were on the case. And we were uncovering new clues, and it became clear that Suge Knight had absolutely nothing to do with Tupac's murder. Now, Russell Poole, when I first talked to him about the murders, had told me that Suge Knight was behind Tupac's murder. And never really made sense to me, since Tupac was sitting right next to Suge Knight at the time Tupac was shot, and those shots were coming for Suge Knight as well. So it never really did make sense to me. But as we conducted our investigation, it became clear that there was a division inside of Death Row Records, and that if you looked at Death Row Records as Suge Knight, clearly you could make the leap that Suge was behind the murder of Tupac. Because who was really behind the murder of Tupac? Well, it was people at Death Row Records. And they weren't just coming for Tupac that night, they were coming for Suge. Why? Because Death Row Records was worth a lot of money, and they wanted to take over the record label. Suge was running everything with an iron fist, and they wanted him out the way. And so once Russell Poole realized that there was a division between Death Row Records and Suge Knight, he felt like he owed Suge Knight an apology, because he was the one that really made it public that he thought Suge was behind the murder of Tupac. And Biggie is a little bit more clear in that Suge Knight was in jail at LA County Jail at the time that that Biggie was shot. And Russell and I interviewed somebody who was in jail at the time with Suge Knight, and he was being treated like Hannibal Lecter, and he was shackled hand and foot when he was in LA County Jail. And it was hard for him to even eat and get the fork up to his mouth because of being shackled. And so this is the story that we heard from somebody who was in LA County Jail with him. So it would have been impossible for him to have orchestrated the hit on Biggie from LA County Jail at the time. And so if he's not behind the murder of Tupac, and he's clearly not behind the murder of Biggie, then it's a waste of time even having that conversation. It's a waste of time even, uh, heading down that road. And once Russell Poole realized that, he wanted to apologize to Suge Knight. And he was able to apologize to Suge Knight through his attorney. And that was a series of telephone calls that I was a part of. And he was able to apologize to Suge Knight through his attorney. But he wanted to apologize in person to Suge Knight. And he never got that opportunity. And I'm going to tell you again, if you've been on this channel, you've heard this over and over, because the story doesn't change. And that's the one thing about the truth. When it comes to the truth, the story never changes. But when it comes to the lies are constantly morphing. And this is the little part that I played in all of this. I was working with Russell Poole. I was talking to him, 2-3 times a day. We were investigating his case files. We were investigating the bankruptcy files of Death Row Records. We had the confession letter. We were trying to run down those clues. And we had identified that an off-duty sheriff had let the shooters into the One Oak nightclub the night Suge Knight was shot, and the shooters screamed as they shot Suge Knight, "You killed Tupac!" And then they blasted him. And Suge, being savvy, stands up, and instead of taking those bullets facing the shooters, he turns sideways, and those bullets, 7 of which hit him, apparently, cut through his flesh, but not in a way that killed him, in a way that wounded him. And he was able to get into an ambulance, get off to a hospital, and be saved. Now, it doesn't mean he didn't have some complications from that shooting, because he did. But he already had health problems, diabetes and whatnot. And that's all that, you can find that in the newspaper articles. So, upshot with this is that an off-duty sheriff actually let the shooters into the nightclub. And you know how nightclubs work in LA? You got to go through metal detectors in order to get into the nightclubs. And so the metal detectors would have triggered, and the gun would have been found out. So letting the shooters into the club was a way to defeat the metal detectors. And it was an off-duty sheriff that let those shooters into the club, that shot up that club and shot Suge Knight. And there were innocents that were also shot. There was a woman that was shot, and so this is not a crime that would have just had one victim, being Suge Knight, the intended target. There was the possibility that many other people could have been in the crosshairs that night, so it was a reckless act, regardless. And the person who let the shooters into the club, he wasn't even disciplined right away. He wasn't disciplined till a year after, when he was let go from the sheriffs. Probably got to keep his pension. We don't know. Probably could just do some research to find that out. But anyway, regardless, there were 37 cameras in the nightclub that captured this on video. And they've got the actual sheriff letting the shooters into the club. And if that's not enough, That same off-duty sheriff drove the shooters to the airport the next day and is caught on surveillance camera at LAX dropping the shooters off at LAX the next day. So when the Tams incident happens, it's the same cops that come to investigate. And when Russell and I found out about this off-duty sheriff, we saw that the sheriffs had a severe conflict of interest in investigating this case. And actually, it was a cover-up for this off-duty cop that let the shooters in the club and drove the shooters to the airport, instead of being an investigation into the incident at Tams. And the way it works with felony murder laws, the person who commits the first felony is the one that's charged with the crime. And Cleabone Sloan is the one that assaults Suge Knight. And so Cleabone Sloan should have been charged with the death of Terry Carter. And you can see in the video, there's a gun. Now it's come out that it is a gun. Eyewitnesses have said that it was a gun. And if you look at the behavior of the people that are in that video, they don't pick up a radio. They don't care about a radio or a cell phone. They put it in their waistband like it's a gun. And so, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, acts like a duck, then it's a duck. And that was a gun. They were coming after Suge Knight with guns. They were going to kill him. And there's all kinds of evidence that has surfaced that who was behind it, personal checks written, and all that stuff. But all of that gets washed away in the cover-up, and instead the target gets placed on Suge Knight. So when Russell Poole goes to the sheriffs to get those cases reopened, he is taking evidence with him to reopen the cases, to go after the rightful people who deserve to be charged with the murders of Tupac and Biggie. And he's taking that information to the sheriffs along with the information about the One Oak shooting and about Tams. And Russell Poole dies in the meeting with the sheriffs. Russell Poole dies in the meeting with the sheriffs. And years later, I would interview Lee Baca, and he would tell me that Russell Poole was killed in the line of duty. So the former sheriff, he wasn't sheriff at the time this happened. I had arranged that meeting through Jimmy McDonald, who was the sheriff at the time. And Russell sadly did not make it through that meeting. Now, there were 3 different stories that were told about that meeting. One of them was that Russell Poole never made it into the meeting. Another story was told that Russell made it into the meeting and never really talked about anything, had a heart attack and died. And the third story that was told was that Russell Poole, at the conclusion of having presented his evidence, grabbed his chest, passed away. So I got a phone call from a captain in the sheriff's who told me blow by blow what he had heard happened to Russell. And I don't even know that it was really a captain. I have a friend who vouched for him and said that it was a childhood friend that wanted to come clean and tell me what he had heard. And the one thing we know from Gordon Martine's Las Vegas, he said that there are no secrets in a police organization, that everybody knows everything. And it's highly likely that there were other people that knew what happened to Russell. And It's never been fully investigated or adjudicated. It was supposedly done by the Monterey Park Police, but as we know with any police organization, they have this thing called budget, and they can't pay out wrongful death money every single time there's a problem. And so just the nature of any police operation is it's going to be a cover-up operation because they have to function on a budget. So getting back to Suge Knight, Russell Poole wanted to apologize. So I had lunch with two of Suge Knight's attorneys and spoke to them about Russell Poole, about his death, what have you, and about Suge Knight's case. One of those attorneys knifed the other attorney in the back, meaning got him fired off the case. And Suge then basically had no good criminal defense attorney on his team. Now, I really felt that it was my duty to help Suge Knight because of Russell's dying wish that he be able to apologize to Suge. So I met with two of Suge's family members, and I met with Suge's significant other. I did a film, Larger Than Life, The Suge Knight Story, which at the time was my understanding of what had happened, Death Row Records and Suge. I've learned a lot more since, but it's still a pretty good record of Suge Knight up to that Tams incident, including the Tams incident. But I can tell you this. I brought somebody to the table who had agreed to put up $25 million to bail out Suge. I had a meeting with the bail bondsman and Suge's significant other, and at that meeting, and the person that was going to put up the money was on speakerphone on that, and he had agreed to put the money up and get Suge bailed out so he could mount a defense. And the bail bondsman said, you will have to endure a DA probe into every single facet of your life and how you got this money. And the person that I brought to the table that was going to put up the money basically said, who would do that? Who would subject themselves to an entire DA investigation because they're trying to put up bail money for somebody? And why is it that a $25 million bail, first off, is happens in a manslaughter case? Because clearly this is a manslaughter case, not a first-degree murder. But upshot is that was enough to scare off this guy from putting up the bail money. Well, I further tried through a different bail bonds person that both Suge and I know in common to get Suge Knight an attorney. And the attorney that I got was trying to meet with Suge at the end of his situation when they were forcing him to take the plea deal. He did not have effective counsel. He wanted effective counsel. I was dealing with Suge Knight's family, and we were going to help him get an attorney, and this attorney wanted the case. Well, the attorney tried to go meet with Suge Knight, and this is a seasoned criminal defense attorney, and he tried to go meet with Suge at LA County Jail, was denied meeting with his client. And this was already worked out, that he was going to be the attorney to help Suge with his case. Well, he went to the judge and said, "Hey, I have a problem here. I'm trying to get in to see my client." And the judge said, "I can't authorize you to go in and see your client. You have to get permission from the prosecutor's office." He goes to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office says, "Hey, you got to fill out this form. Have your secretary fax it over." His secretary goes to fax it over, and now his fax number is blocked by the prosecutors at the DA's office, and he can no longer fax that form over. Then he goes back to the prosecutors and says, "Hey, what's going on here?" And they said, "Oh, you have to actually get permission from the sheriffs for Suge Knight to get a new attorney, or to allow you a visitation, and for them to approve you as an attorney." He goes to the sheriffs, and the sheriffs say, "We're not going to approve you as an attorney." He gets the runaround by the judge, by the DA, and by the sheriffs in this matter. And it comes down to it, and he has to take his 28-year plea deal in this case. And the attorney is told by the sheriffs that Suge Knight was given 2 murders under the table. And what they do when they're giving you 2 murders under the table, it's a really nefarious thing. Because as they're cramming him down, won't allow him to have effective counsel, they're also telling him that if he doesn't plead to this murder and do his 28 years like a good boy, they're going to embroil him in 2 more murders. And not only did he not have adequate counsel for this murder, but they were going to give him 2 additional murders that they were going to promise him that he could never get adequate counsel for. And so he was going to have to take this plea deal, the 28 years that he's currently serving. So I saw all of this play out, and he took his plea deal, and I was in Wisconsin. I had driven George Papadopoulos to prison when I got the call from Suge Knight. I was in my hotel room, and that was the first time I ever talked to him. And I've released many parts of those conversations with Suge. There are others. There are other parts of those conversations, some of which have to do with his case that I didn't think it was wise to release. But I just wanted to, use this time to let you all know what my experience was with Suge Knight and how he got the raw deal. He was shot by shooters, led into the club by an off-duty sheriff. The sheriffs that investigated that case were the same people that investigated the Tams case. And where else did we see that? Well, we saw that with Tupac. There's a cop back there in New York, and he's the cop that shows up at the Quad Studios. And then across town, far away from all this stuff, at a different hotel in a different precinct, when Ariana Jackson says, "Rape, rape, rape," it's the same cop who investigates the Ariana Jackson rape allegations of Tupac. So we've seen this before. It's a setup. And nothing that anybody can do at this point is going to change the fact that Suge Knight was set up in that Terry Carter thing. He was not civilly liable for it because they allowed evidence to come in. And anybody who knows anything about Compton knows that Tams is called Murder Burger. Suge Knight was in the middle of a kill zone. It was where Bill Russian was shot 17 times. Any investigator would have known, would have been able to figure that out. And if they had put anybody from Compton on the witness stand in Suge's trial, because Bill Russian had been shot there 17 times at the exact same spot, there's no way that Suge should have not known that this was a kill zone. And when he saw the gun, he knew he had to hit the gas and get the fuck out of there. And so, back to where we started this thing, it's Suge Knight's birthday. He was focused on the music. And I'm not saying there weren't other things going on at Death Row Records, but I'm saying somebody focused on the music. Somebody focused on getting contracts negotiated, on getting studio time booked, on getting engineers, recording artists, making sure people showed up, and occasionally cracking some skulls to make people work and do their part to create this incredible music that's Death Row Records. And happy birthday, Suge Knight. I hope you have a great day. Hopefully they give you a nice cake inside, brother. Take care.